Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing television discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the financial district.
This is going to be a fun one.
It's been a while since we've talked about a TV show. Obviously, we did House of the Dragon back in the day. We did a couple episodes, kind of theory episodes about Succession. But I really wanted to bring this one to the show, and it's part of my thesis here. And if you're watching on YouTube, this will probably be some version of the title. We're talking about the best show you haven't watched, or maybe haven't even heard of. And we're talking about Showtime's Billions. So this is Billions with Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis. I've seen the whole thing many times now. Maggie's seen the pilot, but that's part of the issue. When I talk to Maggie, I'm talking to everyone. That's the joy of the show. Because I think this is the perfect show for Maggie. And for most of you, since we've cultivated a certain audience over 474 episodes, I think this is the perfect show for most of us. But people just don't know about it, or they dismiss it. So that's where I want to start the conversation. I want to tackle the wrong first impression that most everyone seems to have, almost like conventional wisdom about this show. And that assumption is that Billions is just a Succession clone. Mm-hmm. And I understand on a baseline why people think this, because Succession is more popular. Succession won 1 billion Emmys, and Billions, I don't think, ever won any, which is a travesty.
That's too bad.
But they're both shows about wealth, New York, power players, and schemers. But this is my thesis, because I resent this first impression. I don't think Billions is really anything like Succession, beyond that surface level veneer.
Well, that's really interesting, because when I did watch the pilot, I think I was also going into it assuming it was going to be like Succession, and I wasn't viewing that as a bad thing. I was like, I love Succession. Anything that gives me more of that would be great. And then I watched the pilot, and you're right, it wasn't really like that. And so I was like, I don't know what this is. I'm not invested in this. And I kind of gave up. And it wasn't a bad pilot. Like, I mean, I don't remember very well now. That was years ago when I watched the pilot, but I didn't think it was bad. It just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so then I didn't know what I even wanted. And then I just was watching other things. But you've been rewatching it lately, been getting really back into it, and the latest season just came out. Is it the last season?
It was a couple years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, it just came out. It feels like it just came out. And so you were finally catching up and finishing it, and you've been so excited about it, and I've been so invested in your investment, and so I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, so I was behind on that last season. I just didn't have Showtime at the time. So when I got back in, I watched season 6 to remind myself where we were, and then the final season 7. But that got me so hyped that I immediately jumped back to the pilot and watched all 7 seasons again.
Amazing.
So,
quick question at the top. How did you discover this show? Like, what got you interested in watching it? Because I think a lot of people hear, oh, it's a Showtime original, and you're like, who the fuck has Showtime? Nobody watches that.
And that's part of the issue.
Yeah, and so what got you into this?
I used to be an avid listener of The Bonfire.
Oh,
back when I was in grad school. It was there was Dan Soder and Big J. Ogerson. It was a great radio show on Sirius XM, another platform no one has.
Yeah.
And he was on Billions. He's one of the day traders.
Dan Soder was.
Yeah, who works for Axe. He plays Maffei. And I was so, I mean, you get to know people really well listening to podcasts, as you guys know, listening to this. And so I wanted to support him. And you know, on a surface level, I liked Paul Giamatti. I knew about Damian Lewis, but obviously the obsessive prestige TV drama thing I have now would mean that I would have to watch it anyway, because there's such incredible performers and the writing is so good. But yeah, I got in there just out of loyalty to Dan Soder.
That's great.
I tried it, and the show hooked me. And I really like New York shows. I really loved New York shows when I was living in New York.
Yeah.
So this was part of that for me.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the structure of this discussion, also, by the way, Billions started 2 years before Succession. Just to kind of...
just a little...
Yeah. The structure of this discussion, I have 3 key differences between Succession and Billions that will help prove out this thesis I just tossed out there.
Cool, okay.
And then we'll do a similarity, and then move on to some comps, some comparisons that I think are much fairer for what kind of show this really is.
Awesome. And I think it's probably fair to say we're not going to spoil the show at all here.
No. I mean, I'll lay out the premise eventually in pieces, but the premise is Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis. So sit down and watch the show.
Sure.
But yeah, let's start there.
Great.
This first big difference I want to play with is that Succession, across its whole arc, is always the story of the Roy family.
Yes.
But Billions is not that focused. Billions has distance from its characters, and it has multiple POVs, multiple central storylines. There are, by the end of it, more than 2 leads, but at the beginning, it's Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis. And even that, they have their own ensembles. They come from different worlds. One is in the world of law and one is in finance.
Okay.
So you have two casts. You have two focuses. That immediately is a huge difference from Succession. The setup of Billions, for those who for some reason haven't seen it so far, is a billionaire hedge fund manager. That's Damian Lewis as Bobby Axelrod. It's the endless conflict between him and the district attorney who's chasing him, who just knows in his heart of heart that he's crooked.
Okay.
And that is Chuck Rhodes, played by Paul Giamatti.
Excellent. Okay.
Imagine if, just to lay it out a little, imagine Breaking Bad if Hank was co-leads with Walt.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So there was as much of the criminal behavior as there was of the law enforcement.
I see. And it's almost like a cat and mouse situation. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it's
That's
Tom
fun.
and Jerry.
That's fun.
But it's mean. It's more mean.
Tom and Jerry's very
That's
mean.
true. That's true.
Take it back. One of the meanest cartoons out there.
But the fun kind of addition and difference even from Breaking Bad on this tangent is the glorious monkey wrench that Billion throws in between them.
Okay.
So the performance coach for Axe, who helps get all of his evil scheming day traders into fighting shape, is Wendy Rhodes, who is Chuck Rhodes' wife. So the just to lay it out a little more, the woman who is the co-founder of that hedge fund is also the district attorney's wife. So she's caught in between these two guys who are just trying to kill each other.
Interesting. Does she, maybe this is a spoiler, but does she know what her husband is trying to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
She knows the resentment and insecurity, and it takes a
Okay.
bunch of different forms. But
Interesting.
it's not just this Tom and Jerry sort of rivalry, because there is this third angle there.
Yeah, there's an important element of nuance there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
not
kind
just one guy good, one guy bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's so much cat and mouse. It's funny, I have that in the notes. There's so much tit for tat, tension, and impossible choices. There's so much drama just in that premise. It's such a promising premise, but the show goes so far beyond that. There are so many levels and layers and eras of the show with all of these distinct POVs that just from that one qualification, that doesn't feel like Succession at all to me.
Okay.
Because there's never these two tectonic differences, these two primal sides of a conflict, and then this really fascinating character caught in the middle.
That's true.
It's the Roy family who hate each other but love each other, and they're trying to
They're all
trying to win.
They're all playing all those roles at the same time. Like
Yes.
they all want the same thing, but they go about it in different ways, and they hate each other so much, but they also all love each other, and they love the other people in the middle, but hate them at the same time. And so it's very messy.
Right.
Yeah.
So just there, that's an immediate difference, just in
Yeah.
posture, in storytelling. The second difference I want to play with is in dialogue.
Okay.
So yes, to concede, both shows are wildly profane, which is part of the joy, and creatively so.
Yes.
And played constantly for humor.
Yes.
But I think the difference is that Jesse Armstrong dialogue in Succession is a very different style of wildly profane, funny, dramatic, sad, tragic than the type of dialogue we get in Billions, which is
Okay.
very much in the style of its two creators and lead writers, Brian Koppelman and David Levine.
Okay.
Their style it's like this constant barrage of staccato pop culture references and metaphors. They're constantly talking about movies or shows or sometimes sports, like other pieces of pop culture. But it's at least a couple times a conversation.
Interesting.
It's that layered into the dialogue.
Does it date the show at all? Like watching back season 1 where you're like, oh, that reference doesn't work anymore?
I don't think so, because it's not so much about contemporary references, because
Okay.
most of the characters are in their 40s or 50s.
I was going to say, so it's like stuff from when they were growing up.
Like, there's a joke at some point in the show where, Wendy talks about how many of the day traders just make Godfather references. Like,
okay.
It's more generational, I think, than dated in a contemporary
like
sense.
more timeless references. Yeah. Okay.
And to compare it to another kind of style of writing, or almost these TV dialects that we've come to know and love, in the same way Sorkin's characters, Aaron Sorkin, West Wing, speak in those fables of like stopping and telling each other, there's a guy, he falls down a well.
Yeah. Right.
Those kind of fables you can swap out here for pop culture references.
Okay.
Where it's people trying to make sense of things. Like, there's a great moment where Bobby Axelrod, Damian Lewis, is upset, and he's kind of on the outskirts sort of benched for a minute, and he's at home and he's frustrated and he's watching Inglourious Bastards over and over again.
That's funny.
And there are so many song references. Music is a big part of this pop culture discussion. The show has about 1 million needle drops.
Oh, wow.
Where every time they'll dig through like a Bob Dylan lyric or something, that will be the song that plays at the end of the episode.
Oh, fine.
There are like the pop culture is woven into the presentation of the story beyond just the banter.
Yeah, I feel like there's the music in Succession is like all about the original score.
Yes.
You know, like occasionally Kendall will be listening to, you know, a song and on his giant headphones, but like for the most part, it's weird. Succession is very like contemporary and set in a specific time, but at the same time, it's so focused on the characters that like I don't remember a whole lot of cultural references or like I feel like that show you could stick it in any other time and not change the dialogue and it would stay the same. Like you might have to change the technology and maybe some of the like issues they're talking about, but like the one reference I can think of is Hamilton, and even then it's like a joke about a past thing that used to matter.
We all love Hamilton.
We all, of course we do.
Sure we do.
but like
it's more insular.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So this is interesting. Okay.
I mean, as just another tangent here, Billions went through COVID. They had to stop production and then pick up and kind of finish out the season later, but it does acknowledge COVID briefly.
That's interesting.
It's they you can tell, like every other show that was on at the time, they don't want to make a big thing of it because everyone was so sick of hearing about it and talking about it.
Nobody wanted them to talk about it on in their fiction shows. Yeah.
But they you know, there's an episode where all the day traders at X Capital are wearing the masks and you know Axelrod tests positive, so he's on like a Zoom screen. Like they acknowledge it for a minute, and then later there's sort of the class implications. Like Chuck tries to, Paul Giamatti tries to represent all of the doormen in New York who were kind of left when everyone else fled the city.
Yes,
and he tries to get them back pay for the pandemic.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
They weave it into a story about law and finance in New York at that time.
That's cool.
But again, even watching it now in 2025, it didn't feel dated.
Cool.
I think it would feel stranger if it avoided that.
I was going to say, it feels so like it's meant to be cemented in the real world and in a real time that, and if it's in New York, I think it makes sense to have a little moment where COVID is involved in there because, like, I mean, COVID was a big deal all over the country, but it was a different animal in New York. We were there at the time.
Yeah, it started there for the U.S.
And it was like it was so all-encompassing and it affected everybody everywhere. But like, I don't know, it was a different thing there. The morgues were full, okay? Like, it was a whole thing. So I think it would be weird in a show that's all about New York and all about being really like contemporary and of its time to not address it. Yeah. So it sounds like they did a good job. That's pretty cool.
So the first difference here is the sort of scope that we talk about, focused on the Roy family versus all of these multiple POVs and storylines. The second difference is in the style of dialogue and its own kind of wild profanity. The third difference I want to play with is a larger discussion of scope and evolution. So I did my IMDb work. I did my homework for this discussion. This is I think this is going to surprise you. Succession was 4 seasons, totaling 39 episodes.
Okay.
All focused on the Roy family.
Yeah.
Billions was 7 seasons, totaling 84 episodes.
Whoa, that's a lot.
39 to 84, more than double.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say how many episodes per season then?
About 12 or 13.
Yeah. Okay, because Succession just had 10, I think.
Except for that one season that had 9.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And instead of being 39 episodes on one family, it's 84 episodes with multiple leads. And across the arc of the show, some of the lead actors leave the show and others are promoted up. And not even just as replacements, there are people who graduate up the ladder to being lead characters on their own. I've always felt this way, just as a sidebar. When an actor chooses to leave a show, I don't consider it a spoiler to talk about that person leaving.
I see.
Damian Lewis leaves Billions, like he just made that choice.
Oh.
After around the COVID thing. Also, his wife died and he wanted to be in the UK with his kids instead of in New York filming.
Wow, shocker.
Also, he'd played the same character for, years and years.
Makes sense for him. Yeah, that's totally normal.
And he comes back in the final season. So he's really only gone for season 6.
Okay.
But I don't consider that a spoiler when the actor chooses to leave. But
I
you
see.
have so many different POVs. I mean, none of the Roy kids leave Succession.
No, they don't.
It's a different thing.
The show wouldn't work if they did, you know, because it's so about them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is about more than that. This is about the finance world and the legal world, and Chuck and Bobby are not the only characters in those worlds.
Okay.
And of course, Wendy exists sort of in her own spot between them. It's not a qualitative judgment, but these are very different beasts. And I think the big I'm glad you added all that about Succession, because you captured the unique feel of that show. And I think by comparison, Billions feels like a couple different shows. I think the first 2 seasons feel like a show. I think the 3rd and 4th seasons kind of feel like their own thing. And then 5, 6, and 7 feel like the 3rd chapter of that show.
Okay.
It's a show, it's a story with distinct eras and arcs. You have villains across, a single season or 2 seasons, versus the story of Succession, which is really just one continuity.
Right.
I think the comparison would be in this framework. Game of Thrones feels like Billions, where Succession feels like the first season of House of the Dragon.
Okay. Yeah. That's a
House of
good
the
comparison.
Dragon's one family.
Yeah, it's insular, it's palace intrigue, it's
Game of Thrones
backstabbing, and
is,
it's yeah.
And Game of Thrones is this big overlapping ensemble with all of these distinct POVs. Now, those are our 3 differences. I want to jump to a similarity, and this is just a way of kind of briefly celebrating both shows. Of all the TV dramas, and this is our bread and butter, this is what we love so much, even though we don't talk about it so much on here, this is the thing that keeps us moving. Both of these shows have fantastic supporting casts and ensembles. You know David Costabile from Breaking Bad? Mm-hmm. He's Glenn, the guy who makes the coffee. Who works with Walt in the lab.
When they're in that lab, that kind of nerdy guy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, Glenn, I think is his name.
You know Jeffrey DeMunn, who plays Paul Giamatti's character's father. You know him from The Walking Dead. He was Dale, the guy with the RV.
Oh, yeah, Dale.
Yeah.
Yeah, like season 1.
He in this show is the closest thing you can get to Junior Soprano.
Oh, okay,
without
fine.
stepping on those toes. Very much his own thing.
Okay.
But with that just, oh God, I can't believe he just said that. But with that like great kind of whiplash delivery where he just barks out the worst things you've ever heard.
Great.
He's great. Toby Leonard Moore, who we've talked about. We just saw him pop up in Mank. I love him so much. Dola Rashad, you don't know yet, but you will, and you'll love her.
Okay.
Clancy Brown, who you know from SpongeBob SquarePants. He plays Mr. Krabs. He's also in that new Penguin show, which we haven't seen yet.
Somehow we haven't watched The Penguin. I don't know what we're doing. It's fine.
These next few are for the listener more than Maggie. Rob Morrow plays one of my favorite supporting characters. Rick Hoffman, who you know, Maggie, from Thanksgiving. He was the guy with the mustache.
Okay.
The bald guy with the mustache.
Yeah.
He's in Suits. A lot of people know him from that.
Okay, nice.
Eric Bogosian, who you know from Succession. He's one of the characters that was in both. He was kind of the Bernie Sanders insert who Shiv worked for.
Oh,
with the hair.
The politician. Yeah.
He's in this, and he's fantastic.
Nice.
David Strathairn, I think I'm saying that right, who you know as the head of the CIA from the Bourne movies.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Yeah, he's fantastic here.
Love that
Frank
actor.
Grillo, who
know
you
that
know
name.
from Werewolves and the Purge movies.
Yeah.
He plays a painter in one arc, and he's fantastic.
Okay.
One of Chuck's friends, played by Ben Schenkman's fantastic. Glenn Fleshler plays Axelrod's lawyer. You know him as the bad guy from True Detective.
Okay.
Danny Strong, who's a great actor and a great writer. You'll know him from Mad Men. And of course, my very favorite, Corey Stoll.
Corey Stoll.
I've talked about this before. I've adored Corey Stoll since House of Cards.
Yeah.
I think that arc he has in the beginning of that show is supreme.
Yeah, if you guys don't remember, Corey Stoll is the tall, bald congressman in House of Cards.
Yes.
Yeah, I forget his name. I don't know his name at all, but he was so good.
It's a brutal ending for that character.
It is,
But then I've talked about this before. I saw him in an off-Broadway Macbeth, just a little black box theater performance. I was just walking by and I somehow got a ticket for like $10.
Incredible.
And it's one of my favorite theater experiences I've ever had. I think he did more justice to that character than I've ever seen in any other rendition.
It's amazing.
So when he enters the show before this, but when Damian Lewis leaves Billions, he kind of rises up to fill that spot.
Okay.
And he is so good.
I was gonna say, I bet he could do it. I believe he could fill those shoes.
What a horrible task to give an
poor
actor.
guy.
Because, I mean, I've talked to other people who love this show. It was not uncommon in New York at the time. Everyone's favorite character was Bobby Axelrod, was Damian Lewis.
Yeah.
So him leaving is that's such a losing task to give a creative to, do you do an impression of him? Do you do your own thing? And Corey Stoll absolutely does his own thing.
Awesome.
And he's just fantastic. It's a different beast by that point in the run. 5, 6, and 7, those seasons are a different sort of story, but equally gripping. And Corey Stoll is so magnetic on screen. So much fun to watch.
That's great. I love that there are so many great supporting cast
Peter
members
Russo,
here.
sorry.
Oh, that's his name. Peter Russo. Thank you. I love that there are so many great supporting cast members here, because I'm thinking like the closest thing I can think of right now where like you continuously get new supporting cast as the show evolves over time is like The Walking Dead. And we resented it for that very thing.
The revolving door.
Yes. And like when you were saying like the show feels like kind of 3 different shows over the course of its run, that sort of thing also happened with The Walking Dead, where seasons 1 and 2 really feel like one thing, and even 3 and 4 kind of feel like they're part of that too. And then the show just really changes, and it's no longer the show that we fell in love with.
Ship of Theseus.
The Walking Dead is one of the few shows that we did not finish. Like most of the time, even if we're not enjoying a show as it goes on, we will finish it because we're invested. We want to see how it ends. But like we just fully gave up on The Walking Dead. We haven't watched any of the spinoffs, like because it changed so much and we were so like resentful of it, I think. So it's interesting that this show is succeeding where The Walking Dead did not.
And the first 4 seasons of Walking Dead are some of my favorite seasons of TV.
Right, they're so good, and that's why it's like so disappointing when it doesn't maintain that that quality.
And it's such a tricky task, but I think this one does maintain that interest and that identity even while it evolves, because that central like Tom and Jerry conflict, Tom and Jerry resets at the end of every episode. Eventually, you have to advance that dynamic,
right?
Like between Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis, one of them has to win. Wendy has to choose a side. Some extenuating circumstance, some other villain that they have to team up against. They have to mature that dynamic through the course of the show.
Right, you can't just have it go on forever.
Right. Or then I think if a show doesn't evolve, it becomes redundant.
Yes,
and that's another form
like,
of...
how is this still going on?
That's another like creative death. But to move beyond the Billions Succession sort of binary, I think there are 2 other comps or comparison shows that will give you a better impression of Billions.
Okay.
The first is Mad Men.
Ooh, yeah, Mad Men,
and
which I've seen 2 seasons of.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you've seen the Wendy from Billions.
Yes.
You've seen Maggie Siff. How did I forget her name?
It's embarrassing for you.
She's in Mad Men, and you've seen her arc in the first season of Mad Men.
She was great there.
She's fantastic. So I think the similarities with Mad Men, they both deal in distinct eras. I think that the scope is sort of similar, where they are these big workplace ensembles. And instead of the cultural references that are so constantly flowing in Billions, you have the historical references in Mad Men.
Which are cultural at the time. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For us, though, it's like, oh, JFK, oh, MLK. Like you have these sort of beats that you know are going to happen through the decades that show covers. But also, Mad Men very much feels like a meditation on capitalism.
For sure.
Where you're sort of embedded on the wrong side. That's how all of the finance part of Billions feels.
Right.
But there's that contrast with the family life. You know, at the end of that beautiful pilot, when Don goes home and you realize, this guy's married.
Yeah, he's got kids.
Yeah,
yeah, it's the worst thing. Yeah.
There's some of that when you have Wendy transition between Damian Lewis and Paul Giamatti.
Yeah.
You always have that sense of contrast between these 2 worlds. So I think Mad Men is almost a better comparison there.
That makes sense.
The other one is The Sopranos.
Okay.
Because I realized the day traders that kind of fill out the floor at the hedge fund, they don't feel like the lackeys of Royco in Succession. They feel like Tony's crew. I was
going to say.
You develop characters that you get to know. And
they're mobsters.
Yeah, but they're all kind of capos. They're all like criminal underlings. And that's what these characters feel like. You get kind of there aren't direct allegories of like a Polly Walnuts. Or
sure.
You don't. It's not that linear. It is funny that Corey Stoll played Junior in the Sopranos spinoff movie.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
I think it also captures that monkey wrench that I talked about in Succession, where Wendy kind of takes the place of Melfi.
Yeah.
But where you have that sort of therapy angle with the major criminal.
Yes, it gives you this whole different like human side of this person. Yeah.
But I think it's even smarter dramatic storytelling because this Melfi, Wendy, is tied into
Right.
the cops. Like, we got to know the cops chasing Tony Soprano eventually.
Yes, but not at the beginning. We were very focused on Tony and his people.
And
yeah.
it never felt like they were real leads.
No, they were just like, it was like, here's another perspective on what's going on to increase the dramatic stakes. It wasn't like they're an essential part of the ensemble. Yeah.
In the same way, Hank was more of Walt's brother-in-law than he really ever was the cop chasing him.
Yeah, I mean, it's there throughout, but like that's not...
It builds at the end, but I think playing that tension, like nipping at his heels constantly, is what Billions does so well.
Cool.
But the other part of The Sopranos, and I think you sort of touched on it earlier, is the way the show evolves and adds in new characters. You'll have Steve Buscemi in there for a season.
Yeah,
and he's great, but then he sort of shifts out and you get another cast of characters. You'll have Ralph Cifaretto.
Who's
Ralphie?
that? Oh, okay. I thought his
with
name
the
was...
wig.
Oh, yes.
You'll have him in there for a season, and
Yeah.
then he circles out. I think that speaks to the eras that I was talking about in Billions, where you have guest stars in there for a season or two at a time. But there's also this underlying thing in The Sopranos, where as much as it's about the mobster stuff, it's about like melancholy and depression.
Yes.
And this constant quest for purpose, the doubt that invades Tony and him trying to unpack his childhood and all these other elements while this elemental conflict rages on the surface. And I think Billions does a great job of exploring that too.
Interesting.
Because every episode feels like a battle in a larger scale war or conflict. And at the end of that hour, someone has to lose. So they're constantly licking their wounds and reflecting. And one of them digs into their past, or Damian Lewis needs to go on like a vision quest with Wendy to like dig into himself and heal and do that like performance coaching. So there is that subliminal part. There is that subconscious sort of exploration in this show too.
Cool. Does the show ever, because I'm trying to think about like the initial premise of the show would sort of pitch, Damian Lewis's character as being the villain, or the anti-hero, the like guy who's bad.
The fun to watch one.
Yeah. He's a bad person, but you still see, the levels of humanity in him, and you're invested in him even if he's doing bad things, and you hate the bad things he's doing. Versus Paul Giamatti, who seems to be only trying to do a good thing. So does it, because what's so great about these other shows you're mentioning, like Succession and The Sopranos, is that every character in that show is a terrible person, but there are elements of them that you understand and sympathize with, and that's what's so fun to watch. Like even like, Carmela in The Sopranos, like she's not actively involved in the mob, but she's like
complicit.
She's complicit and knows what's happening. And even the kids who are like innocent, they're pieces of shit because they're spoiled and like don't have good parents, and then you see them grow up and become different levels, like
no fucking Ziti.
Right, exactly. It's in the pilot. It's a 10-year-old saying that. And so I'm wondering what Paul Giamatti's character is like without spoiling anything, because he could so easily just be this hero.
And that's the glory, I think, of the show. I'm so glad you said that, because that isn't even in my notes. There are so many sequences that humanize. I'm just using actor names because you haven't seen it.
It's easier for me. Yeah, thank you.
Damian Lewis. There are so many admirable qualities that he has. He has a genuine affection and protective love of Wendy, where you see Chuck, like, is he chasing this hedge fund guy because he's done financial crimes or because he's really close with his wife?
Yeah.
And does he care about shutting down the hedge fund and her losing her job? There are constantly, you undercut one while bolstering the other. So by the time these guys finally do meet in like a, knockdown, drag out grudge match.
Because it's like a shootout in a Western.
They're both compromised. And you get it.
Okay.
There's that ache at the heart of Paul Giamatti's character, and there's that guilt at the heart of Damian Lewis.
Interesting.
But it's the way you constantly balance and counterbalance them.
Okay.
I don't know how much you can even say one is the good guy or bad guy once you move past that initial premise.
I see.
And I think that's the fun of the show.
Well, and also because presumably if Wendy is like a key player in this big hedge fund, and Paul Giamatti's the district attorney, they're probably doing all right financially. And so like
she makes way more money than he does.
Right.
And that is another kind of thorn in their marriage.
Right. Well, and I'm just saying, like, he knows how she gets her money, and that is like, if that's a central part of the show, is like these people who make all this money are awful and terrible,
but he benefits from it.
Well, right. So that's also, that element too. Okay.
He has a lot of family money that because of his position, he's wrapped up in a trust that he can't touch.
Oh, okay.
But the relationship he has with his father, which is fucked up in a whole other sort of way.
Cool.
That's the kind of guy who would put his money in Bobby Axelrod's hedge fund.
Yes, right. Okay,
so he's surrounded by this world that he's also railing against, even though he benefits from it. Like, there is this constant tension and hypocrisy and examination. It's so juicy. It's so fun to dig into.
That sounds great.
To move to some kind of closing thoughts here.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about this on the show because I realized Billions has quietly become one of my most rewatched TV dramas. The way we try to talk about art, I don't think the words best or favorite are worth anything. I don't think those are interesting qualifiers, but rewatching is interesting. Because during college, I rewatched Mad Men like a dozen times.
Yeah, you watched it a lot, I remember. Yeah.
And I've done that in different eras with different shows. And I'm realizing now I've seen Billions a lot of times. And I'm trying to figure out why it speaks to me on that level. Because yes, I can tell you should watch it. It's a great show. It has superb actors devouring great dialogue. And every season is great. And I think that's part of it. I think I admire it from a creative angle.
Right. And then you love like strong dialogue. You love that in a TV show. And you love rewatching that.
I think it's not just a show I enjoy. I think it's a show I learn from. Because some seasons are different and risky, or, oh shit, Damian Lewis isn't there anymore. How do we make this not the same, but still good? And I think it's that every season is such a complete unit. Because even if it's not, oh, this hasn't been my favorite season, the season finales are always such incredible, intricate crescendos.
Cool.
This show might have my favorite finales, maybe barring one or two Game of Thrones, like the season 4 finale.
Right.
The first 2 or 3 seasons have the ones that are just in my, because I've rewatched them the most.
I see.
Like the season 2 finale is so good.
Well, and I feel like we don't get great season finales anymore because now shows are just long movies. And so I feel like you get to an end of a finale and it's like, I don't know, you get to the end of the season and it's not very exciting. It's just like, that's the end of this part.
Yes.
Come back next time. I don't know. I feel like we don't do big bombastic season finales in prestige drama the way that we used to.
Intricate blowouts.
Yeah,
you don't, because shows aren't written like that anymore.
No, they're not.
And that's part of what I'm building to here. Billions evolves, not just in who's the lead character at this point, but the characters' appearances really evolve. It feels like a show that was on air for a long time. Their outlooks, their motivations, you age with these characters.
Cool.
And there's almost something unsentimental about the show, that it's willing to drop one of its leads, that it's willing to so change all of its leads.
Sure.
Despite the intricacy of the plotting, it feels unsentimental. It'll have great callbacks to things, not in a cheap way, but in a way where someone says something to you that you remember. Not everything, but there'll be like one line someone remembers, and later at an important moment they'll say it back to them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like bullshit artifice in the way it usually does now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It feels like how humans remember their relationships as these kind of turning point moments.
I see.
But it's not that unsentimentality I find incredibly bold and fearless creatively, because the show always has something on its mind. And even if it's not what I was expecting, it's engaging. But this is the big thing, and I'm glad you were kind of getting there on your own. Possibly more than any other prestige TV drama that you and I love, Billions has a mastery of episodic storytelling.
Oh, yes. That's the other thing that TV shows don't have now. Yeah.
Episodes.
Like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Episodes, exactly. They just have like chunks of a movie. We've sort of lost the procedural, which is sad, but I understand. Like, there was a lot of filler in like cable TV show, procedurals, and like things kind of reset and don't matter post episode, whatever. And I get moving away from that, and I don't mind these longer form methods of storytelling, but you're right. TV shows do not have episodes anymore. They have chunks of a story. The episodes do not have their own individual story arcs anymore. Like, that's just kind of gone away because it's the binge method. It's the binge model. And so you watch, 3 or 4 episodes in a row. So they don't need to have their own arcs because those 4 episodes have one arc. And so that's fine. And I hate that so much.
I think it's a lack of craft at some point. I don't want to always credit it as an artistic decision.
Sure. Yeah.
Because
they're not, because people have different writers on shows don't have like the, oh, I worked on the X-Files for 10 years kind of thing anymore.
Vince Gilligan going into Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
and I think that's a
right.
perfect comparison. But each episode here, in the same way when you and I rewatch something like Mad Men, or especially something like The Sopranos, every episode is a full meal. When we were watching Game of Thrones when it was on, even though we'd read some of the books, each episode felt like a complete chapter.
Absolutely.
Like you finish a great meal and you're done, and you push back the chair and you just think about it.
And it got me excited for next week.
Each episode was complete enough that those intervening 6 days were you processing and studying and reflecting, versus when Netflix started and you and I binged all those shows. Orange is the New Black. I had a great time with that show.
Great show. Especially in the first couple seasons. It was really solid.
But I had a great time with it because I binged the whole thing.
Right.
And I think that was one of those precursors to where we are now.
House of Cards, the same thing. Yeah. We'd watch the entire season in one weekend.
Sure.
Yeah.
But with this central conflict between these two guys, if every episode is a different scrimmage or battle or scrap between them, they all form, it's almost like short stories, each individual episode. And then when you look back on the campaign, the larger conflict between these two forces, it is a tapestry of these battles and wars they've gone off to.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
I realized this is a show that I wouldn't otherwise talk about unless I gave it this sort of talked about it through this sort of lens.
I see.
And yes, I am advocating for it. I'm putting it under the spotlight to recommend it to you, but also just to celebrate it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what we used to do, and maybe we haven't done that as much as we wanted to in the last couple of years. So yeah, I just wanted to bring this to the table.
This is
and
fun.
talk about this show for a while, because I love it. I learn from it, and I wish people talked about it the way they talk about Succession.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I feel like I don't ever hear anybody talk about it. You're the only person I know who has ever mentioned this show. That doesn't mean that people in my life haven't watched it. I just may not realize, but I've never heard anybody talk about it. I have a question. Some TV shows nowadays will have like if you think about like, especially miniseries, like The Haunting of Hill House is like all written and directed by Mike Flanagan, and like that's his project. Whereas like other TV shows, especially back in the day, you would have a rotation of writers and directors and different people working on it. What's the situation with Billions? Is it sort of like one central creator, or do they bring in a lot of different collaborators?
Well, I talked about it before. Koppelman and Levine, you have these two writers, one of whom is a novelist. So you have these different kind of pursuits and mediums that you're bringing to the table there. They are there through the entire arc of the show, and the other listed co-creator is Andrew Ross Sorkin. So that's where you get all of the knowledge of these worlds and sort of this journalistic approach to New York and finance and law and all of the real stories that inspired some of these characters. Those three guys are there through the whole arc of the show, and looking at some of the directors, you have a lot of people who were there in the early days of Breaking Bad. Those people who are there for character drama, not like drug kingpin blowouts.
Sure.
A lot of those people pop up here, and I recognize those names from when you and I would listen to that Breaking Bad podcast.
Oh, that's why. So I'm rewatching Breaking Bad on my own, and Cam, you were asking the other day, like, which directors are on the episodes? I was like, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention, and I know now why you're asking
names
that. That
like,
makes more sense.
Colin Buxey. I remember Vince Gilligan talking about him in Breaking Bad.
That's funny.
And he's on a bunch of these episodes. You have, it's
okay, cool. That's fun. That's
it's
fun.
the kind of crew you'd love.
I like a rotation of directors on a show when they're good. Obviously,
also
but
with
like,
84 episodes, that's plenty of directors coming in
and
out.
that's the joy of TV is you get lots of different directors coming in and interpreting the story. And some directors you like more than others, but then it's like fun. Like I remember watching Game of Thrones when like certain directors would come up in the credits who'd be like, okay, we're in for a good episode. That was always fun. Okay, great.
Yeah, there were no names I dreaded.
That's nice. That's nice.
Everyone was just a different flavor, but I still liked the meal.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. I love that.
What a fun show.
Well, this has been a fun discussion. I am now really hyped for Billions, and I'm going to watch it. It's going to be great.
You can also I'm sure you can get some kind of free trial for Showtime, or you can get it through Amazon Prime.
Yeah, Amazon I feel like has partnerships with like every streaming service except Netflix, so you can figure something out and watch it. It's fun.
It's such a fun ride, and I think it'll hook you because we all like the same kind of things. I see this from the comments and the emails. We're all of a mind on this. I think this is if you haven't seen it already, I think you'll get a lot out of this show. I know I certainly do.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited for that. Well, this has been a fun discussion. Thank you, Cam. Dear listener, if you are wondering where Cam's great perspectives and opinions on writing and storytelling come from, it's because he himself is a writer and storyteller. He has his recent book, Lemon Tarts in Space, is available for purchase through the link in the bio or the link in the description of this episode, video, whatever you're consuming it on. It's available as a paperback novel or as an audio drama, which is produced and directed and performed by Cam and also performed by our good friend of the show, Tristan. Anyway, it's a rip-roaring time. It's Ridley Scott's Alien meets Monty Python. It's a hoot. It's so much fun. We appreciate your support. You can check it out down below. Also, we have a Patreon. $2 a month, you can support the show, get access to a whole back catalog and ongoing bonus episodes. We talk about all sorts of stuff over there. And I think that's it for our promo for today.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you on Friday for another brand new episode.